Check Podcasts.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Political Capital, your source for all the latest in BC politics. I'm your host, Rob Shaw from Check News. Thud. That is the sound that the BC Museum project, the refit, rebuild of the Royal BC Museum, made this week. Those are Premier John Horgan's words, not mine. It landed with a thud, and we're going to talk about it this week, along with the first week of Kevin Falcon in opposition, a bunch of other topics. It has been very busy in BC politics, and we're fortunate to have the Pod Squad with us each and every week to break things down. Katie Merrifield, Vice President of Wellington Advocacy, Gillian Oliver, BC Green Strategist Extraordinaire, and Jeff Ferrier, Vice President at Hill and Knowlton, here every week. Thank you all for being here. You help us understand the crazy and sometimes unpredictable world of BC politics, because when we were recording this last Friday, none of us knew that a brand new museum project was going to be announced for almost $1 billion, $789 for the museum itself, $200 million we already knew for an archive building. It has morphed into a political football, again in the Premier's own words, in the last week. Issues over why it's being done, why it's so expensive, an 8-year closure of the existing museum, all sorts of concerns brought up throughout the week, dominated BC politics. Let's start with what we think might have gone wrong here. Gillian, why don't you kick us off? On the one hand, it's a brand new museum that should be good, but on the other hand, that didn't land the way maybe government thought. What do you think here?
Well, I think the biggest issue is timing. It's coming at a time when we're sort of out of the emergency mindset of the pandemic, getting back to sort of the regular business of governing. And people are starting to sort of notice where the government hasn't delivered on different things. You know, we had doctors rallying on the lawn this week. Affordability is worse than it's ever been. And I think this just sort of didn't fit the public mood, like Les Lane wrote in the TC this week. And I think the government just, it's something that they had been working on for a while, and they just didn't take the time to reevaluate how it was going to land. I think the other piece of it, and this is, what they could have mitigated, is they didn't really show their work. This has apparently been happening behind the scenes for a long time. There was no business case released, no sort of discussion of what were the other alternatives considered. Why is this such a big price tag? It's going to probably be the most expensive museum project in Canadian history. And that's an issue that the New Democrats should know that they're vulnerable on. It's what's brought them down in the past, big over budget infrastructure projects. I think that it could have been mitigated had they just provided a little bit more detail, shown their work, and taken time to sort of assess the public mood.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree with you. Timing, a major issue on this. You could almost see $1 billion for a museum being a very positive investment in BC's culture and history at a different time, but it seemed to have been not received that way. Jeff, what did you make of all this? How do you think it ended up being what it is?
Well, you asked what went well and what didn't go well. I was surprised that you asked what went well. I don't think anything went well with the rollout. In the interest of fair time for the government, they've staked out a position that the museum is a core asset. It's in a state of disrepair. It's been ignored for years. And this investment is needed so the museum can fulfill its historical and tourism functions. On the other hand, the museum, rightly or wrongly now, is an object of derision. The plan's endorsers, who offered up 3 pages of glowing quotes in a news release, have made like J.D. Salinger and gone into seclusion. And the Premier and his minister are left to try and explain why all of this is a good idea. And as political capital savvy audience knows, when a government has to explain, their efforts will be in vain. So, my advice to government here is to take an opposition that has spent the week saying, spend it on this and not on that, at its word. I think they've spent 5 times the museum's budget on a variety of initiatives they've advocated for. Government, call their bluff. Take the party of cuts and controlling spending at its words, scale back the museum investment, and make some big, bold investments to solve big, bad problems the BC Liberals created, whether it's get the medical school, shovels in the ground, nursing spaces, we need them, make it happen. Housing in Vancouver, get behind the Broadway plan, fund it. Fraser Valley Crossing, get to work on it. Call the opposition's bluff. You'll never have a better time to invest because the opposition that says you can't manage money and you spend too much is begging you to spend.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. I think that would be a scaled down version of the museum. The problem might be that the New Democrats have promised a business case for the existing model is going to come out next Friday, which would be kind of doubling down on justifying it. And maybe they shouldn't go that route. I don't know. We'll talk a bit more about what we think the path forward could be for this. Katie, how did you read this? You've done a lot of government announcements in BC and Alberta. When they don't land the way that is intended, usually what's behind that and how do you process that as a government?
Yeah, like when the chief political correspondent for Global News voluntarily and unsolicited compares this museum incident to the 1990s Fast Ferries debacle, the government is in trouble. Like, from my perspective, everything that could go possibly wrong with this, from conception to rollout, it has gone wrong. From the motive to message to timing, like, this is a real life migraine playing out for the government. Like, in terms of motive, it confusingly went from decolonization priorities to seismic safety. On message, there's been a couple. Minister Marking in question period was talking about protecting our province's asset and that she wouldn't want to take the risk through an earthquake to wipe out our shared history and that this was a calculated decision. Well, there are 250 schools that haven't been seismically upgraded and hospitals as well. So what about those assets? What about concern of the risk of actual human beings? And where was that calculated decision? Premier Horgan then tried to push back, saying that the BC Liberals rejected this project since 2006 as if this was an effective tactic to take. And what I gleaned from that was that he just provided a great example of a responsible and pragmatic BC Liberal administration who recognized this project for what it was. And then finally on timing, I agree with what Jillian was saying. Like, in terms of a corporate calendar rollout, sure, you get props for lining it up with Museums Week, but with a deficit, affordability crisis, and lack of physician access, I am simply baffled as to why this would be considered a political win in the current environment.
The defense that kept changing for the museum, I think that was part of the problem here. You touched on it. At one point, it was about decolonization. Then this week, it became about the seismic safety of the museum artifacts. But you're right. Immediately, people said, well, what about the seismic safety of schools that are twice as old as the 50-year-old museum? What about the two major ERs in Vancouver that are at risk of collapse in a moderate earthquake and aren't seismically safe? The comparisons. I don't think the New Democrats ever intended to defend the museum on seismic grounds. But suddenly the fallback positions became weaker and weaker until those became part of the problem too. And now the question I want to go around again is, what does the government do about this? I know that it is an active cabinet debate right now, and not everyone is on board with continuing this thing. You can pull the plug on it. You can announce more consultation and delay it for a period of time. You can choose to proceed because the premier is the Teflon premier, which is one of the nicknames for him. Nothing sticks to the guy. His approval ratings stay up. Just say, to hell with it. We're going ahead. No one's going to care in a couple of years. Or you can, I guess, try to argue it out on the merits. There's a business case next week. It has 40 appendices. It is hundreds of pages long. It will be redacted and full of blank pages. Is that going to convince the public? All these suite of options. Where do you think government begins to kind of coalesce, and what should it be thinking? Let's go around in reverse order here. Katie, why don't you start us off?
They're in a bit of a no-win situation right now. If they double down and push this forward, I would argue that will provide a huge sword for Kevin and the BC Liberals on a daily basis. While I disagree with Jeff on the classification, I guess, of motive, I agree that reducing it to a modest, inexpensive refurbishment that may be an option. That is still going to give the BC Liberals some fodder to use, and it will counter all the arguments that they've made to date. But at this point, we're faced with a choice of less bad options at this point.
Jeff, what do you think? You've sort of expressed reducing it down. Do we reduce the timeline too? I think one of the reasons some people are miffed a little bit about this is an 8-year museum closure is an entire generation of kids who don't get to access the museum. Is that part of maybe the reconsideration of it?
I think if you scale it back, in terms of the scope of the project, then you're going to scale back the impact on people who want to visit it, school groups who want to go, tourists who want to see it when they come on their cruises to Victoria and are looking for a world-class place to go. So I think that will mean 8 years will no longer be how long it'll be closed, which is something else about the project that we haven't talked about. We've talked about the money. The timing is a big deal. But I would say to those folks in cabinet who are considering this right now, pivoting is not surrendering. And I know that there are times when you feel like if you bow to public concern about something that you've done, that it is somehow a loss. I see it as a strength, and I see it as an opportunity for you to leverage the desire that all the opposition parties have expressed for investing in school seismic improvement. And the government has the biggest capital budget right now on the side. But adding to that, medical school, nursing seats, name what you will. Pivot off of this, use the energy that's there from the public, the interested in this, the opposition that has said spend, and spend on stuff that's going to make a difference in everyday British Columbians' lives.
Yeah, it's a great point. And New Democrats know this because that was their first term in government in minority. They were very responsive to the public. They put things on hold. They reconsidered, and people loved it. They liked the idea of influencing their government with their feelings. And it's not a weakness. It looks like, in the terms of pure politics, it might look to some people like this is giving Kevin Falcon a win on his first week in opposition. But when it's not really about him, it's about the larger public sentiment, just trying to keep Kevin Falcon from not getting a win is a road to ruin. Jillian, what do you think they should do?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's going to be really interesting to see when they release the business case how they got to this figure. If there's some sort of logistical reason why it can't be scaled back, because I think if that's an option, it's a good one. And I agree with Jeff. I think focusing on other things that people want in other areas of the province, in particular, it will help. I think assuage some of the anger that people have been feeling in the last week.
Can I just ask one question to the panel? Are you aware in the history of politics of a business case, the release of a business case changing public opinion on a highly emotional issue? I cannot think of one.
Nothing
I cannot
comes to
think of one. Anyone think of one? Yeah.
No.
We'll see
no,
how that goes.
Not unless the business case is just hollowed out inside and there's a big wad of cash in the middle and you flip it open. But no, it's gonna be very difficult because we know the business case is complex. The minister's already told us it's huge, it's massive. Who's gonna read it? And I the public is reacting with emotion because technically canceling the museum is not going to solve the family doctor crisis. The premier was explaining the difference between operating and capital. Once you have to start doing that, you've lost the public anyways. But it's not. It's a sentiment. It's not a fact-based reaction. It's a sentiment of unhappiness, and no business case I don't think is going to fix that. But let's move on to the sentiment over the first week of Kevin Falcon, the BC Liberal leader, being in the House. He was the opposition leader officially on Monday, sworn in as an MLA, and pretty much hammered away on the museum all week. That was just sitting there for him to just start hitting on. Came up with a bunch of phrases, $1 billion vanity project, boondoggle in the making. He just kind of dined out on this for the week. Jeff, what did you make while watching this, and how do you think Falcon did on his first week on his journey back?
He had a nice little photo op to start the week, and congratulations to him for being sworn into the legislature and taking on his new role. He had a gift from heaven dropped into his lap and did a gigantic celebration in front of an own goal of the government's, which is, that wasn't anything that he actually did. And I don't think the tone he used in the legislature reminded me more of a model parliament than it did of serious parliament. That whole digging the hole thing that he did, where that was all in good fun, but it didn't, position him as the next person to be the premier of the province. He scored points. He had a better first week than most, but his real job in that leadership role is to bring together federal Liberals and federal Conservatives. That's a long job, a tough job, and that work remains to be done. And you just have to look to Alberta to see how challenging that can be for even the most skilled political people.
Katie, let's keep Alberta out of this. But
I was just going to say.
What do you
I was
think
saying nice things about Jason Kenney there.
UCP,
That's a whole different
animals and
podcast.
BC Liberals. Yeah, anyways.
How do you think he
Okay,
did?
so I'm going to disagree with Jeff, obviously.
What?
I know. I'm violating our pact. Look, I don't think Kevin could have had a better entrance into the legislature. His first question nailed the priorities of this government: $1 billion museum over rising and unsustainable affordability for all British Columbians. He got the government to scramble and commit to releasing the business case, and the Premier was forced to acknowledge fault over the mishandling of the announcement. So that's an A+ week in my books.
What do you think, Jillian? Were you surprised at how well he did, given this gift that he was handed, or how did you look at the week?
Well, I think, if you compare him to Andrew Wilkinson, I think he presented better in the House. He sounded energetic, upbeat, seemed really happy to be there. I think that he's showing that he can be an effective leader of the official opposition. But I think, his job is bigger, not just to sort of keep the party together under challenging circumstances, but also to show what is his plan for the province. And, because when it comes down to election time, it's not going to just be, did the NDP underperform its own promises? It's going to be, can you promise something better? And I think that's been the BC Liberals' problem since 2017 when they lost power. They haven't put forth any ideas that have really resonated super strongly with the public, and be looking forward to see where Falcon takes it.
Yeah, some proposals on solving the family doctor crisis. We ask him that question, and they're not there yet on what it is that the government should be doing. But that also is not necessarily the opposition's role 2 years before an election to come up with ideas government can steal and then take credit for them. So, Katie,
yeah,
did you want
it
to
is
jump
100% not the opposition's role to be dictating policy for the province of British Columbia 2 years out before an election. That's the job of your platform in an election campaign. It is the opposition's job to criticize the many faults of the existing government.
Well,
Okay.
the
All right.
whole of the role of the leader of the opposition is to be clear about values and priorities that they have in the legislature, and drawing on those to try and influence the government to do things differently. And the constant refrain of "you stink, you stink, you stink," that's fun, I suppose, but it doesn't help the legislative process get to a place where the government's bringing forward legislation and it gets any better. But I will agree, because McLean's not here and we don't have this opportunity to agree on things, I will agree with Jillian that absolutely Kevin Falcon surpassed the Wilkinson bar this week. Absolutely. 100%.
That's missing McLean, because he would kind of pipe in right now and say, you know what, I agree with everyone. Everyone's really good. That brought us all together. It's harmonizing. There were other big topics this week, even though the museum kind of dominated things. And we wanted to do a grab bag, let people bring up some other topics here while we have time on the podcast. Was there anything that jumped out at you, Jillian, this week? Something we haven't touched on yet?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the government released the results of its review of the Deep Well oil credit program, which I talked about on the show before. They're basically going to be phasing out what is the biggest and most inefficient fossil fuel subsidy to the natural gas industry. However, it doesn't go as far as environmental groups were hoping in phasing out all subsidies. I think, so the response was mixed. I think it's a good thing if you think that the problem with oil and gas development is that the province isn't getting enough revenue from them to spend on other things. But the province said they don't expect this to lead to any decrease in oil and gas drilling. So if you think that's the issue, then you are not going to like it.
Yeah, a very complicated issue that even in the independent review on the oil and gas regime, the authors who were experts said, this is too complicated to explain. But the main point being that the government's trying to walk that balance, you're right, between environmental concerns and the monetary concerns. Jeff, anything jump out at you this week?
The ignominious case of Craig James jumped out to me, the former clerk of the legislature. The courts found him guilty of fraud and inappropriately expensing 3 dress shirts, a tie, and a suit. And For me,
of all the things, of all the
things.
accusations against him, that was wood splitter, all these other things. That was it.
Yeah, that's true. But for me, the scandal of this isn't what's illegal; it's the legal, and it's the fact that public service is supposed to be about what you put in and not what you get out. And here you have a guardian of the legislature, one of the senior most officials in government, and it wasn't just on the suits. They talked about it in terms of the court ruling talked about it in terms of the payout as well. As this culture of what can I get out of this for myself rather than what I can put in. I hope that everyone in public service, the vast majority of whom know this, and it's about people and about results for them, and not about getting the wood splitter at your house on the weekend.
Yeah. Okay, Katie?
Yeah, just to answer Jeff's earlier question on business case, because it's been bothering me. I think maybe St. Paul's Hospital might be one that when the business case was released, it helped inform public opinion, but we can save that for another chat. What stuck out to me this week is we had another protest at the BC legislature. There's always going to be protests. Experiencing them is common with all stripes of government. This one was interesting, though, because it was a number of physicians and folks who are lacking access to physicians standing on the legislature lawn and asking the government to do something about this very pressing and ubiquitous challenge across the province. So Premier Horgan, he's not incorrect when he calls out the disproportionate federal funding, but I'm getting the feeling that it's a rather weak piece of pushback when it's clear that there are other levers that the province can pull on this. Camille, the protest organizer, their rallying cry was really, we're just tired of hearing promises of things to come. We want to know what is happening right now. And what are you going to do about it? What's your plan? So I think that this is one, obviously, that the government needs to put some more intense focus on exploring what the province can actually do to compound healthcare challenges rather than just blame the feds.
The Premier did meet with doctors at BC this week, talked about coming up with a timeline of action, because if the province waits for Ottawa to change the healthcare transfer system, we're going to be waiting a while. That's a fight that's been happening many years. Not that it's not worth fighting for, but the immediate pressure on government on the family doctor crisis is something that absolutely government's going to have to address. I think if it was easy, they would have done it by now. It's enormously expensive and enormously complicated, and we're going to be hearing a lot more about it. Thank you, everyone, for watching this week. Make sure you subscribe. If you're watching on YouTube, Check TV. If you're watching on Check, stay tuned for This is Van Color with Mo Amir coming up next. If you're listening on the podcast, thanks so much for subscribing. We'll see you next week here on Political Capital.